So that's the legacy
Well,
I'll
that's when
remember about
I've
News
asked
Hub.
people like Winston, are they a threat to national security? Because when you're ginning up that sort of division that could end up in violence, serious violence, then you become a threat. You're not a,
Yeah, they become the enemy of the people. As Trump always said,
yeah.
fake news is the enemy of the people. And that's another precise and accurate truth.
Well, I agree. Just let's think of one word again, as simple as that, right? Television. Why do you have televisions in your home? And I think most of the RCR listeners don't even listen to the news anymore. I know I haven't in years and years. But the whole point was we're talking about it now because I think COVID has managed to jolt people out of, at least a few people, out of their sleeping state. And television was always there. They said quite a few television presenters in the US were CIA and this and that. So
Mockingbird Media.
yeah, yeah. So obviously you've got to tell the story like it is. But there's also, as you mentioned, Paul, you mentioned that it could be a threat to national security, and that's essentially it. Because if you think about the WEF and the Agenda 2030, what has always been standing in their way? It is the United States of America and their way of living. So if you look at the WEF video, which says "you own nothing and be happy" and stuff like that, it says U.S. would not be the global superpower. There'll be a handful of countries. So obviously, this has been a demolition job for a while. They had to break down the U.S. And its democratic way of thinking and doing things, and also the capitalist system. And that's why when Trump came in, obviously democracy became populism. They renamed it. So if and Brexit was no. The media is full of it because every research paper, everything that I don't know what you call them, the where you have monkey surveys and all that kind of stuff, pointed towards no Brexit, but Brexit still happened, right? So the media is trying to take you a certain way because they have a story to tell, which is working in their agenda's favor, and they don't want you going a certain way. So obviously, when you talk about ASEA, yes, I'm fortunate I get to bring my message on this. It gives us a wider audience as well, because I was talking about these kind of things with some friends, some family members, and clients who were then spreading the message, and it was word of mouth business. Through ASEA, people are listening and going, "What this guy is saying makes sense. What he said 12 months back is happening now." And what we've got to understand is it is moving towards a user fund model because over the next year, year and a half, when people can clearly see, I've given you examples about inflation. They say inflation is slowing down, but the average family goes out and they're spending so much more money. So they're telling you not to believe your own ears and your own eyes. So thinking, you're too stupid to think for yourself. So listen to us. And as people are waking up through the forms of inflation and now in America with the elections and how one side of the justice system is when they go after Trump uh, because of certain things, but they don't go after Biden or Hillary Clinton for the same espionage or whatever state
Two-tier,
secrets that they were
Yeah.
holding
two-tier
on to.
justice system. Yeah.
Well, exactly right. So people can see the media is biased, the institutions are biased. And as I've said, between now and 2032, our form of government that we thought we could rely on is breaking down. And that goes into your currencies and trust in government. As I said, governments will default because less and less people will start buying government bonds. There'll be a shift towards private things and people will stop believing governments altogether. I read something yesterday with the Canadian government now because Justin Trudeau's falling and most Canadians are saying we don't want to wait till 2025 to have elections. We want to have elections this year so we can boot them out. And he's saying, oh, this is the Indian government meddling in our private affairs.
Mm, mm, mm.
So they're blaming it on another government, and they're saying, why would we care about what's happening there? In fact, if anything, you guys meddle in our election. So all of this happens behind the scenes, anyways. Obviously, we know America's been changing governments, it's been in the business of changing governments for quite a while. Examples: Middle East, Saddam Hussein, all of that, as I mentioned. But now, when these guys are losing popularity because the Agenda 2030 is out in the open, and we know who the global world leaders or your Klaus Schwab's puppets are. Um, People know and they're saying, no, we don't want this. So they have to blame it on some other country or somebody else, or China did this, or Iran did this, or Russia did this. It's never their fault. Have you ever
Mm,
seen? It's never their fault.
But it's
mm.
always projection, isn't it? So
Well, exactly.
what they're doing, they accuse you of.
Yeah.
Speaking of currency, we've talked a lot about currencies, Farzin, on our Money Talk chats. Zimbabwe's brought out a new dollar.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
and we talked about how their currency became essentially absolutely worthless, right? Their previous currency. Like
Yeah,
it was worth,
yeah.
in fact, they're paying you to take it away.
Yeah, it's useless now.
Zig.
Yeah, the new currency is called Zig, but just to give some context, after 2008, they printed $100 trillion note because they thought that would solve the problem. But it was buying nothing and it was absolutely useless. And since 2008, they've had, I think, 6 different currencies or 8 different currencies, and none of them are working. The inflation problem's not going away. And as I've explained, it's not the currency, it's your faith in government. Which obviously even Adrian Orr's interview last time that we discussed was he said, "Oh, don't blame me. It's the fiat currency which has the backing of the New Zealand government. That's why people trust it." So people got to understand it has no value. People just trust the government. The day the trust in government disappears, the currency goes into oblivion. So what has happened is again, right now they're using the Zimbabwean dollar again. They've tried it so many times, and the inflation rate is about 60% month on month. So imagine you bought something for about between 55 and 60%. You bought something for $100 this month. Next month, you're buying it for 150. Then you're buying it for 175. It goes on and on and on. And so what they've thought is, how do we do this? And their interest rates, by the way, we cry about our interest rates. Because the inflation sitting at 50 to 60, their interest rate is 150%.
Gee.
Wow.
Yeah. So if you take $100, you're going to pay back 100 plus the 150. That's how ridiculous it is. So people obviously aren't going to borrow. But the new currency is called ZIG. It stands for Z is capital, I is small. So it's Zimbabwe gold. So what they've tried to do is since 1971, as we discussed, when Richard Nixon got rid of the gold backing of the currency, and since then we've all been on a fiat currency system, Zimbabwe has seen there's problems. We can't fix this by just chopping off a few zeros and calling it a new currency. And they're having problems in their economy because this again leads to civil war. People can't eat. They don't trust their government. Obviously, this is to do with Mugabe and his time and the corruption back then. So they're gonna try. As of I think by the end of April, everyone, as I've explained this in there also demonetization. So they've given everyone by the end of April to hand in the old currency. And as of I think the start of May, they're only going to use the ZIG. Now the ZIG is backed by gold, they say, which is a good move. It's a kind of a signal to the market. But the thing is, Zimbabwe only has 2.1 tons of gold. So they say we have about 0.4 tons worth of gold in diamonds. So we back it by that. But we also have a lot of resources under the ground because there's a lot of mining happening there. So they're trying to back their currency by their natural resources and the tonnage in gold that they have. But mind you, as I've said before, no government really wants to do this. They never, ever want to go back to this because it takes the printing press away from them. They have been forced to try this, and this might be part of it because they've applied for the BRICS membership as well. This might be kind of a trial balloon to see what happens and if the currency gets a little bit stronger in the sense no inflation. Because right now I think a dollar is about 30,000 Zimbabwe dollars. And this exchange rate, because it'll be backed by gold, will go from $1 to about 13.9 ZIG, as they call it. So that's
Okay.
quite a good appreciation, but it's backed by gold. But when I say backed by gold, it doesn't mean you could just go into a bank and give them a ZIG and say, give me gold. Okay? It's just backed by. It's not exchangeable for gold like we used to be able to. And if some of our listeners follow gold markets and all of that, I know my clients also do, and I do on a daily basis. Gold has been going up crazy for the last 2-3 weeks and a longer trend. That's because the central banks are buying it. So why would a central bank
Oh,
start
so they're
buying gold?
positioning for the same kind of thing, are they?
They're positioning for a long time. For the last year and a half, 2 years, central banks are now buying. Remember, they can print money out of thin air
But
and
they're
create.
using that to back currency.
No. They're just getting gold in the background without any of their citizens knowing. So China, I think in 2022 and 2023 has the highest amount of tonnage it's bought, about 25% of the global reserves. So what do central banks know is coming, which their own citizens don't know? And this is not out in the open, but the prices are going up because central banks are now, okay, just a simple context. In Ukraine, Russian funds were frozen. Okay, not stolen, but frozen, and Russia was kicked out of the SWIFT system. So they lost about $300 billion worth of reserves. If you're a central bank, say New Zealand or Australia or even somewhere in the Asian countries, You were holding on to US dollar reserves. When I say US dollar reserves, it's US dollars and US bonds as well. Now, as interest rates are going up, people are realizing that America cannot literally service its debt. And the third factor is they can kick anyone they do not like out of the global banking system. People are going, we're going to start dumping US treasuries and we'll start buying gold. But this is right now still on the fringes. It's the central banks. So that is driving the price up because what do they know that we don't know already?